Advent greetings to you, Missouri Mid-South Conference. In this time of rush and busyness, and for me, this is my last video with you for 2016, as next week I will be traveling home to Texas and then to spend the Christmas season with my family before I return back to you in ministry on December 30th, 2016, and then starting back in the office January 2nd. I thought that I would share with you in this last video and in this time of Advent and Christmas in preparation for the Christmas Eve services, and since Christmas this year is wonderfully on Sunday, I thought that I would share with you my sermon that I've been preaching in different places. One of the interesting things that I've learned as a conference minister is that the way that I preach and the preparation that I often put into a sermon each week as a pastor of a local church has to be different as a conference minister in a conference ministry setting. One, because I don't have the time, unfortunately, to do the exegesis each week on a different passage. And number two, I can't preach from the lectionary because the churches are changing and the dynamics of the churches, and I may not know the intricacies and have established that kind of intimate relationship that wonderfully a pastor in a local church gets to do and establish and be able to dig in. And so I've found this great rhythm and this balance for me as a preacher and one who loves the exegesis of preaching, but also in relationship with the conference and in the churches in which I preach, to find some kind of rhythm of substance for preaching. And so here's what I've done. A few months ago, I asked one of my close friends who knows me, who knows my preaching style, who knows the sermon that I have in my back pocket, to share with me maybe 4 or 5 different passages that she would encourage me to preach on. And so I looked at those 4 or 5 passages from the Hebrew scriptures, from the Christian scriptures, and I chose 2 or 3 that for a quarter, for about 3 or 4 months, that I could weave in and out and do the exegesis on, but then preach from different perspectives, whether it's an anniversary or whether it's a church in conflict, whether it's a church with confirmation, whatever the special occasion for that local church. So the sermon that I've been preaching in some different ways and different places for the past month and a half has been in focusing on Paul's letter to the Philippians, Philippians 4, especially verses 1 through 9. And often I have begun my sermon by quoting verse 2, "Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I will say, rejoice." Now I have to share that when I first have approached this passage before my exegesis for preaching in the Missouri Mid-South Conference, this was not one of my favorite passages. And I think my friend knew that this is not one of my favorite passages, and so she was inviting and maybe nudging me to lean into this passage. One of the reasons why it hasn't been is because in my childhood faith formation, faith tradition, this passage was always used as a way to say, you just be sugary sweet, rejoice, and you just forget whatever it is that's causing you pain or struggle or hardship, and you just do what you need to do in order to live with joy and happiness, and yay, rejoice in the Lord always. And for me, that did not ring true to my soul. Because there isn't, for me, in hearing that or in trying to live that, rejoice, there's something superficial, and there's something that doesn't hold substance and integrity. And so I have often not preached on it because I didn't want to have to go that sugary sweet, you just rejoice, you do that. So in my study and for my sermons in the Missouri Mid-South Conference for the fall of 2016, I sat with this passage. And I wondered and wandered in this journey of what is Paul saying? What is Paul saying in the context of when the letter was written to that church in Philippi? And what is Paul and the Spirit of God through Paul saying to us today? And that's where the substance of the sermon came. Because often when I would hear it, I would think that Paul is writing from this mountaintop experience. You know, he's accomplished lots. He's succeeded in starting all of these churches. He's got these churches that are living out his theology and his approach and his vision of who Jesus of Nazareth was and is. And so he must be speaking these words to these people from this lofty place of, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, we're good. Rejoice, because, hey, life is good. But that's not from where Paul was writing. He was writing while he was in prison. And he was in prison not because he murdered someone, not because he stole from someone. He was in prison because he dared to say to local churches, to communities, to religious leaders, and to government leaders that all people deserve to be loved. That all people are created in God's image, and from that place deserve to be treated with justice and fairness and equality. Rejoice in the Lord. This person who has been imprisoned for living out his understanding of the essence of God through Jesus, love fully, love wholly, love inclusively. It's from that place where he was arrested. And it's that place where he is in prison, where he says these words and gives these words. Some biblical scholars understand that he's writing thinking that this is the last letter he will ever write to any church at all because he's about to be executed. What we know later is that will happen, but this is not the last letter that Paul writes. But he's writing with that, in some ways, that abandoned spirit of, okay, time is short, life is quick, here's the essence. Rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always, at all times. The Greek word is panton, at all times. Rejoice. There's a substance here that helps us to understand that Paul is not speaking these words and offering this mandate from a lofty place of sugary sweet life experience. Paul is saying these words and offering this mandate from a place of suffering, from a place of death being imminent, from a place of injustice. It's from that place that we should hear the words spoken to the church in Philippi. Even and out of your suffering, your pain, the squabbles you're going to have, the challenges, rejoice in the one who created you at all times. And in case you're having a hard time hearing that just right now, I'm going to say it again. Rejoice. In our Advent season, one of the candles that we light is joy. And in some ways, it's very easy to find that joy because Joy is all around. We look at our children. We go to the Christmas pageants. We go to the Christmas parties and we see joy. And I would caution you this Advent and Christmas season to look deeper, because there's a depth of joy that is far more substantive than what we see in the glitter and the sparkly experiences of this season. Because in our own lives, we have to dig to where Paul is, where the substance is, where the suffering is, where the authentic nature of our lives really reside, where the injustice, where the fear of the unknown and the fear of our future. And it's from that place that we must hear Paul say to us, rejoice in the Lord always. On my drives in to the church, to the conference office, I listened to Krista Tippett's podcast. Krista Tippett is through NPR, and she does wonderful conversations and interviews with different people of faith and religious perspectives in segments called On Being. And this segment this morning, this podcast, she was interviewing Father James Martin, who is a famous Jesuit priest, very grounded. I really encourage you to listen to that podcast. And a part of what he says is talking about joy. And that there's a correlation for Father Martin. A correlation between a person's joy and a person's relationship with God. And he says, the people who are most in touch with God are joyful. Let me say that again. The people who are most in touch with God are joyful. Not from a joyful, superficial, glittery, glitzy, everything's just so wonderful because God is on our side joy. It's the kind of joy that comes when you have been in relationship with the Holy One so realistically, so painfully, where you have shared the very intimate essence of who you are, your anger, your rawness, your grief, your excitement, your dreams, your love, your passion. From that place, Father Martin says, when we are in touch with God in that kind of intimate way, out of that comes joy. Those who are in touch with God in that way are joyful. And then he began to share and give examples of leaders in our faith traditions. Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu. These are joyful people. You see the smiles and the essence of God's love radiating through them. And it's not because they're in some lofty place where been there, done that, got the Christian t-shirt. It's because, Father Martin says, they have wrestled with who God is creating them to be. They are so in touch with the Holy One. They are so enmeshed in relationship with God that their very essence comes in joy. And he says, if you look at the stories of Jesus, Jesus is a person of joy. Too often we see only the suffering Jesus on the cross, which is important. But the life of Jesus is filled with joy. Why? Because of who and whose we are. When we understand and when we are in touch with the Holy One, then we can indeed be in a place of joy. My brothers and sisters of the Missouri Mid-South Conference, this is the place from which we as individuals, we as local churches, we as the conference and the United Church of Christ must live. Rejoice. Because you are so in touch with the Holy One that you understand who and whose you are, that you can relate and offer the very rawness of your life, and that the Holy One can be there present with you and say to you, I have made you in my image. And out of that place comes a depth in our very being, in our lives, in our churches, and in our conference. Rejoice in the Lord always. And in case you may not be able to hear it again, I will say, rejoice. Oh, my friends, what a joy it has been and is to minister with you in all of our different expressions. May we continue to be in touch with God. May we continue to wrestle with who and whose we are as we follow the ways of Jesus, as we proclaim, embody, advocate, protest by saying that all are created in God's image and all deserve to be loved. Rejoice in the Lord, who created us always, at all times. And again, Missouri Mid-South Conference, I will say, rejoice. This day and forevermore. Amen.